every single person by name and the years that you worked at LSS or Lutheran Welfare or whatever part of the organization you worked for at that time. So anyway, I think I'm going to start with, and again, turning it over to Dennis Gimmelstead from the Historical Center to sort of tell us why we're here today and why our discussion is important to the Minnesota History Center.
Now let me just give you just a brief background about how, why our office is involved in this. I work for the State Historic Preservation Office, and we're an office that's mandated by the federal government in each state. And what we're supposed to do is look at projects that the federal government is funding or assisting and see if there are any historic buildings in the area that might be affected. And we're supposed to either try to preserve those buildings, or if the buildings are going to be lost, we're supposed to try to preserve them. That's our charge. It is something that we are not very used to seeing yet. The Corpus building was built, as you know, in the 1950s. But buildings that were built in the 1950s are now becoming 50 years old. That's the criteria that we work with. So we have a whole new generation of historic buildings. When I started working for the office 30 years ago, we would have never thought of a building like this to be historic. I mean, it was only 20 years old then. So it's a new area for us too. And it's nice to work with historic buildings when we have people that have experience for those buildings, because the way we record something can be a lot richer that way, because we can figure out what people thought about the building and can integrate that into the document. So that's why we're here. The record that we get of this building will went to the Minnesota Historical Society archives. That's where this information will be mentioned. So we're glad to be here, and it's been a great pleasure to work with everybody that's been involved in the project.
Okay, thanks very much. Next, we will hear a little bit from Charlene Royce, who is an independent historian and kind of an expert in the history of buildings and what's necessary to make sure that before building is left, it's not all the history around it is not lost. So Charlene, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your contribution to this whole project and to today's session.
Okay, well, I got involved with this project by studying the history of the building, and as Dennis said, this is kind of a whole new era for historians to be looking at, and it's getting so my childhood is becoming historic, which is a little daunting. And it's also a little daunting talking to a group about a history of an organization where you're all involved with it and have been, and it's so important in your lives. And I'm just somebody who's flown in, although my grandmother, I think, was really dedicated to this organization, so I feel like I have a little bit of a tie. Why don't you just a very brief summary history to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of mostly facilities. As you know, Lutheran Social Services as it is today is a melding of all sorts of different organizations. There was the Vasa Children's Home. The two main ones were the Vasa Children's Home, which dates back to the mid-19th century, and those facilities are down in Vasa and in Red Wing. The Lutheran Intermission Society of Minneapolis was established in 1905, and that's another one of the direct predecessors of Lutheran Social Service. It became the Lutheran Welfare Society in 1927, and then Lutheran Social Service in 1963. That organization moved around quite a lot over its life since 1905. One of the first things it did in 1908 was establish a boarding house, and that was Luther House at 828 South 6th Street. Most of the early facilities were right downtown. And this building was a former hospital, and it was actually run by the organization until 1943. Then there was Trabert Hall, which was at 625 East 14th Street, so again, a downtown location that's no longer there. So in 1927, the group got another name. It had several different names since 1905, but it became Lutheran Welfare Service, and it moved into the brand new Citizens Aid building, which is right down on the corner of 4th or 5th and 8th Street, 4th and 8th Street, right downtown again. And within the Citizens Aid building, it moved around a number of times as the group grew and needed more space. Finally, in 1945, they did the big move out to the, further south to 2110 First Avenue South. This facility was an old mansion, and it was originally a really spacious setting for this organization, which had been really cramped in the Citizens Aid building. But then in turn, this building became cramped as 40 more employees or so were added in the next decade. And finally, in January 1956, Lutheran Welfare Service announced a $470,000 campaign to raise money to build a new headquarters building. Unlike any of its earlier facilities, this was going to be a purpose-built building. This was a new building. It was the first new building the organization had had, and it was going to be designed specifically to suit the organization's needs. So by February of 1956, the board voted to acquire this site. Groundbreaking was in May of that year. Bids weren't actually let until early 1957, so it took a while to raise money and get everything in place. And on Friday, January 17th, 1958, the staff started moving in. And the next Monday, they opened their doors for business. So it must have been a busy weekend. The staff, which by this time was over 50, was just totally delighted with this new facility, which even included an apartment for the resident caretaker. And I have a great quote from one staff member. While vivid remembrances of sacred experiences, some happy and some heartbreaking, will always be associated with 2010 First Avenue South, no members of the Lutheran welfare staff were weeping on moving day. People who have patiently put up with inadequate space, lack of heat, insufficient lighting, and other working handicaps for several years regard January 17th as a day of emancipation. So people were very happy about this new facility. The project architect, the office was E.A. Sovic and Associates, which was based in Northfield. And by the time the project got finished, as many architectural firms do, it had changed its name. It was Sovic, Mathry and Associates. And Mathry, Sewell Mathry, was the lead architect for this project. This office was a modernist firm. If you think of Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, the international style, they were modernists. They did not want to do any of these period revival styles. They wanted clean, sleek buildings. And they did a lot of work for the Lutheran Church. They designed a lot of churches. They did a lot of buildings on St. Olaf. And they really had a philosophy of how they thought about buildings. Ed Sovic wrote a book called Architecture for Worship, which talks about their philosophy, which really applies to their secular buildings as well as their sacred buildings. And he said, architecture is both a technology and an art. As a technology, it attempts to meet the demands of modern shelter, which can be complex indeed. A building needs, in the first place, to be organized so that the spaces within and about it are big enough for their purposes, but not too big, are shaped appropriately, arranged logically, and properly interconnected. Assuming that the spaces meet these technical criteria, the problem of architectural design can be defined as that of giving character to the voids by the way we enclose, light, and otherwise define the voids. So this is how the architect is thinking. And an article in Lutheran Welfare talked about the various spatial needs of Lutheran Welfare Service. And it said that the organization had not just one public, but many publics. It had the clients, it had staff, it had volunteers, board of directors, professional affiliates. So there were a lot of different people that this building had to please. There were two main sections to the building, which reflected the agency's function and philosophy. On the north end, it was the direct service to client space, and the south was administration and also spaces for the publics, the chapel, the library, the lounge, lunchroom, conference rooms. And it's also important to note that the landscape was a very important part of the design. I think there's an interesting description that Lutheran Welfare provided of the building, which talks a little bit about this whole form and function thing. The new building is designed to give troubled and anxious clients the greatest possible privacy, comfort, and protection. Each kind of service is separate and has its own little waiting room. Each worker has a private office which doubles as an interviewing room. There are even private side exits. Each room is soundproof so clients will know their story is not overheard. The scale of the building is human and comfortable. It is simple, earthy, warm in the materials used and colors selected. And the article noted that while it is true that help and strength come to clients through their relationship with chaplains and social workers, yet the atmosphere and the tone of the place can help or hinder this all-important relationship. Seldom is a social agency privileged to plan and build what it believes to be most beneficial to clients. So that was the idea behind this place, and now you get to talk about whether it met that challenge. And it was, of course, serving as the service building and also the administrative offices until 1993, when the administrative offices moved to St. Paul.
Now, so we don't miss anybody, we're just going to go person by person. Your name, please, the dates that you worked for the organization. And so we'll start right here with Nancy Steffen, and we'll go right around the table this way. And we'll even take the current people just so that we document who was at the meeting today, if that's okay.
Nancy Steffen, and I came to Lutheran Social Services, Lutheran Welfare, in 1959 in the fall. I worked in the secretarial pool primarily for the child care unit.
And I'm Marcia Carlson. I started Board of Christian Service in 1960, and then I came over in the merger in 1963. And I worked in child care, and I'm also worked with the Vesa Lutheran Home for Children. So I commuted back and forth down to Red Wing for 7 years and worked with the children down there and admitted the children to the Vesa Lutheran Home for Children before they were admitted to the state institutions. So I worked here for 7 years.
I'm Sue Jorgensen. I came to Lutheran Social Service in 1964 in the child care unit, and stayed about 4.5 years, I think.
And I'm Marie Malgren, and I started in this building in 1973 and left in 1995, and worked primarily with women placing their children for adoption and also a large teen parent unit.
I'm Shirley Hooker, and I first worked at the Board of Christian Service in 1960, and when we moved to this building, I believe it was 1963, but in that time, and I worked with the unmarried parent unit with people making decisions, and I retired in 1989.
I'm Dolores Ramby. I worked at 2110 First Avenue South from 1954 until 1962, so I was part of the group that got to move here. I then was away for a while, came back in the mid-70s and worked, probably from 1978 to 93 when I retired from our office in St. Paul, and I did work with adoptive parents, single parents, family counseling.
I'm Gail Adelsman, and I worked with Lutheran Social Service in the beginning, 1965, for a couple of years part-time in the adoption unit, and then in 67 became the Director of Communications and Public Relations, and worked for LSS till I retired in 98.
I'm Al Bostelman, and I worked here from 1966 to 1991. I was in the family counseling unit, working with couples and families, and we had a lot of group workers, so we had boys groups, and then I worked with an aftercare group of former institutionalized people who lived in the neighborhood who had left the psychiatric state hospitals after many years.
I'm Sharon Hendrickson. I started at Lutheran Social Service in 1964. I am currently an employee. I have worked in the counseling unit the whole time.
I'm Paul Ide. I'm not sure of my dates, but I had 2 different stretches of 10 years each here with 10 years at Children's Home Society of Minnesota between them. My last job here was the most interesting, actually. It was a coordinator of life enrichment, which was a new service for this agency. Jim Brown was really the one who precipitated that. So I traveled around the state and trained clergy and others in pre-marriage and marriage counseling instruments. That's about it.
I'm Donna Mayotte. I've been Donna Mayotte. I'm a psychologist. I've been here since 1990. I'm still here. It became LSS while I was here, so I was sort of hired to work at Lutheran Social Service, and I have a lot of very strong feelings about this building because it was built for people to work in, and I never felt like I was hermetically sealed here. I have worked with neighborhood populations, refugee populations, transitional housing populations, all the various folks that have come into this building as our services have changed.
I'm Paris Dunning. I started working at LSS in 2002. I'm currently an employee. I work in the housing department here as a volunteer coordinator.
I'm Doris Hanson-Kurtz. I came here in 1947, worked until 1964. I started out in child care, then unwed mothers, and the last 9 years I worked in adoptions and covered I had an office in Duluth, and so I covered the northeast section of Minnesota, all the way over to the range. And Dr. Jardy frequently thought I could enlarge my area, and I protested, and he said, "But you know, you could do a lot of fishing." And I said, "Can't you just imagine me, a Lutheran welfare worker?" It was Lutheran welfare then, and I stayed with the area. I guess that's about it.
I'm Gretchen Camp. I work with BKB Group, and I'll be working on the new design of the new Center for Changing Lives and the Park Avenue Apartments.
I'm Bill Friedel, Communications Director at LSS. I came to the organization in 1997.
I'm Pat Connolly. I've been with LSS for 6 months now. I'm working on the team that's helping to manage the new project. So I look forward to hearing your stories. I don't have too many of my own yet.
I'm Darlene Lund, and I'm the Executive Administrator for Mark Peterson, and I've been here since May, so new kid on the block.
I'm Peter Kramer, and I guess I represent the thousands of clients. You all work here, and I came here. I was introduced to Lutheran Social Service by Bill Seablum, who's a dear friend of mine, and Bill had worked as a graduate student of his was a man named Kungchil Pak, who, after finishing at Minnesota, went back to Korea and started an organization called Korea Social Service. And on one of his trips, at that time he was working with Welcome House in Philadelphia, placing mixed race Korean kids, and met with Bill and was introduced to Lutheran Social Service. And so then because we knew Bill and we were thinking about adopting, my wife and I met Mr. Pack, and so of the first 5 kids who came to LSS was one of my daughters. We have 3 homemade kids and 3 adopted daughters, and she's kind of the middle one, and the other 2 are she's Korean American, and the other 2 are from Vietnam. And my experience of the building is all of the things that Ed Sovic tried to make it. It's a wonderful, wonderful building, and I think it served all of those needs and met all of those expectations. And my guess is that Bill Seablum could probably recite that description of the building that Ed, and I know Paul Ide. I was looking around the room for people I know. I'm pretty, it's been a while, but and none of you have changed, but so you probably didn't recognize me, but I think I know other people at the table. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
And I'm Dennis Gammerstead with the State Historic Preservation Office.
Charlene Royce, S. Royce and Company.
Okay, we're all introduced then, and thanks so much. I think we're going to have to all try to speak as loudly as we can, because this is kind of an odd connection. I can't do any better than what we've got. So if we can speak loudly, that will help. So I'm going to throw out some questions, and if you would like to reply, please do so with your hand first, and then that'll be a signal to the cameraman and to the mic man so they can get around you to hear your answer. little uncomfortable to do that when we begin, but please try. So the first question then really goes back to Charlene's description from the architect. And what were some of the things about this building that you thought were impressive? When you came here to work, when you brought clients here, what were some of the things about this building back around in the 50s and 60s that you thought were really impressive?
We had our own offices.
Say more about that.
Well, over on First Avenue, there were times when we wanted to remember Jan Strelnick's, how she would go in one of the bathrooms to dictate. We just didn't have space. So there would be like 4 of us in one former bedroom. When we came here, we had our own offices.
Thank you. What were some other things about this building that you thought were impressive?
Well, I remember coming into this building in the mid-'60s for employment and being interested in the adoption program. And I was really impressed with walking into the building. There was a big fireplace, remember, in the front, and the reception was right inside. And people were sitting quietly together. And there was a peacefulness here, a respectfulness in the building. And I really feel that translated as people moved from the services, that they felt a sense of dignity and protected. Often we would see social services delivered to, what I would say, bunches of people almost, and that was not the feeling. It was a very respectful feeling. And it was the design of the building. I think it allowed people to move into various wings that where the service was needed. That just felt very respectful to me.
I have always appreciated the fact that I think nearly every office or workspace has a window, most all of them to the outside, and if not, to a courtyard or a skylight or something. I thought these people who designed this building realized how important light was to us. And as I said earlier, I also appreciate the fact that you could open the windows. But there was light everywhere you go. Even if you go downstairs into those below level, there are windows in those offices, in those rooms. And I've always been grateful for that, because I've worked in places with just walls. And people would put posters on their walls of outdoor scenes because they couldn't see outside. So this I've been very grateful for in my years here.
Other comments about the building and its impressiveness?
I came with my mother back. It had to have been shortly after Lutheran Welfare opened. I grew up in the Lutheran Free Church, and our board members came down to Minneapolis to visit the benevolence, where our benevolence dollars went. One was Lutheran Welfare at the time, and then it was Deaconess Hospital and Augsburg College. I had a medical appointment downtown, and so my mother and I joined our rest of our members, and we came to Lutheran Social Service. And being a young farm girl walking into this beautiful building, I remember was so impressed by the carpet. It was turquoise and black stripes, the beautiful cream-colored leather sofas. Everything was new and pristine. And I was told they did adoption here, so I was certainly wondering where the babies, because I thought I was going to see some babies here, but no, they were in foster homes. And then when I graduated from business college, I was interviewing at various places, and one of my family members suggested that why don't I try a Lutheran church or Lutheran welfare. So I came and I interviewed with Dr. Jardy. And in looking at my background, he also was Lutheran Free Church, and he started reminiscing. He knew relatives. We had a nice visit. So I don't know if I was hired because of who I knew, or rather for my skills. I had just graduated from business college, and I think they said that they never hired anyone who didn't have at least 2 years experience. So I think they took a risk, and I'm still here. But it's been a wonderful time, and this building is like home. I mean, it's like I've been here 42 years, and the thought of it being taken away is very emotional for me, as you can tell. So it's with bittersweet that the move is going to happen.
I remember back, I think, the late 60s, early 70s, we had the Urban League come in, and they brought in neighborhood people to talk about building. At that time, our family counseling unit was across the street, and the people from the neighborhood talked about how imposing that building looked across the street, the big iron doors, and that they didn't really felt welcome. They didn't feel welcome coming there. But this building had, you know, I never knew architecture could make a difference and to make people feel welcome. The people in particular that I worked with were people who came from institutions, and institutions have sort of a regimented look to them, and they're designed to kind of control, keep people in, and there's a clear demarcation of who's in charge and who is patient, you know. But this building kind of worked, the way it was designed, it made people feel welcome. The people that I worked with, particularly had spent a lot of time in the state hospitals, felt at home. In fact, they would come early sometimes, and that became kind of a problem. They would come early to the building, and they felt at home. It just didn't have an institutional look to it. And we did use the building for Christmas parties, and they usually had the fireplace going that day. The janitors would always open up the vent and make sure, and they got wood for us, and so people sat around. They invited their friends, because this was an important, because it was like going to a big banquet, and they invited many as their friends they could, and they all dressed up when they came over here. So it was, I think the building communicated warmth and respect, and they respected the building in turn. We didn't really have any vandalizing it.
How about from down on this side of the table? Okay, Shirley, we'll go to you.
I felt when I was here that the people who came to see me might have been from out of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they felt respected. They came into a nice, attractive building. The door was open. They could sit, and I remember the fireplaces too. In my memory, it was burning a lot, but that could be wishful thinking. But it was always very nice, and then we just have to speak out. Marilyn or whoever it would be asking for, and they'd come to a private office. And I can remember families, and particularly some men who brought their daughters, and how good they felt that it was in a private office, and they felt secure, but I felt they felt respected. The building shows respect for them as individuals, and I still feel that way when but it was good.
I'm going to restate that question again. You know, really two questions together. What were some of the things about this building that you thought were very impressive, and also some of the things that you remember fondly?
Besides the fireplace?
Well, I worked at 540 Capitol Boulevard, which was 2 blocks of the Capitol, and it was a rickety old house. And I remember working downstairs in the basement, and there was always cats there, so I won't say any more about that. But when I came over here, I had my own office, and I remember the fireplaces, but I remember there was a chapel here, you know, so you had just a sense of warmth with the employees and everybody that came here. You just had a good feeling. You know, not only was the building warm, the people warm, but just everything was nice and cozy. Much better than an old office building.
I remember, speaking of the chapel, we used to always have chapel services
Right,
too.
and that was wonderful.
And that was a wonderful way to have a week
Start
go.
the week.
And being in child care, I remember we had, the babies would come here from the foster homes for their medical checkups, and that was very convenient. Instead of having various clinics off and away somewhere, there was a central place they could come. It worked well for the doctor appointments, but it also was a chance for the foster parents to be able to visit while they were waiting with their babies. And that part, and then just the cohesiveness of everyone being close by. If you had to talk to the unwed mother worker or the adoption worker, this type of thing, it was always very close and easy way to work.
Somebody had a picture earlier today about chapel. Tell us more about that. You started, Sue, talking about the chapel, and Marcia, how did that work?
Mondays. On Mondays, we had chapel. And we took turns leading chapel. Everybody kind of took a turn to lead chapel.
They didn't have the pastor for the...
No, we did, people that were in the building. I just found what I said at one of the times in my memoirs.
I just, speaking of that Monday morning chapel, I mean, the office is just emptied out, and Dr. Jurdy was the president of the organization at that time, and it was very important for him, for all of us to be there. And I think that was just that particular chapel room had all this wonderful light coming into it. Again, those courtyards played such an important role in light in this building that you just felt like you were sitting in the light. And it wasn't a form, nobody preached at you. It was different staff members, each one taking a Monday morning, signing secretaries, bookkeepers, chaplains, social workers, and they would just give a 10-minute meditation. It was just a sharing, which I think really built a sense of community across the different service units within the building. But there was, just like this room has, this wonderful light that came in, and it was such a pleasant, peaceful place, and a really sacred way, I think, to begin the week for all of us. At least for me, it was wonderful. Just wonderful.
Taking on to that, I think the camaraderie among the staff was always good while I was here, and that though I was a secretary, those who had their social work degree and were high up on the educational scale, it didn't seem to make a difference as it does in some businesses. And then again, the courtyard, I was in the secretarial pool, and so having that courtyard with the outside light was really good. And I think with the secretarial pool too, we were close to most of the probably adoption was the furthest away, but we were close to the child care, we were close to the unmarried mother unit. We were, really in a good location in terms of the services we provided to the staff around us.
Thank you.
Can't forget, we had 2 weddings and a funeral in their organization. One of, I could speak to that, one of our Minneapolis community group members passed away, and his family was in Sweden. And he was here virtually alone most of his life, and he passed away, so the group decided it was important to have a funeral for him. So the funeral was conducted by one of our chaplains, and one of the secretaries played piano, she played, and some of the community members were the pallbearers. So we had a lovely service, and then we had 2 weddings. One, I believe, was a wedding of a client, one of Marge Kirshner's clients, and then a secretary in our unit who was from out of state. And so we had a wedding here on a beautiful April evening. It was in this room, and we had a reception downstairs. So it has been multi-purpose. It served many different events, which was wonderful.
I would just tag on to that having the funeral created a bit of a problem because it was during the day. And so Dr. Jurdy had to let all the staff know so that their clients would not be startled when they saw a casket being brought into the building. And people handled it very well, and everybody got involved, including the landlady at the boarding house where this man had lived. She insisted on singing the solo. She was a soloist down at the Basilica, so it was an interesting mix of community participation and staff participation in that whole event.
These are great stories, great answers, and I think they're along the lines of what the Historical Society and the preservationist principles are after, so keep going. Another question here. What parts or characteristics of this building help you in your work, help made you more successful in your efforts than previous places that you worked? And this building was regarded as a cutting-edge building when it was built, as we heard from Charlene. How did it seem that way to you? Again, how did this building make you do your job better than places you had worked prior? And what about it was cutting edge?
Well, one of the things, I don't know how you guys do your case notes now, but when this building was first built, there was a dictation system that was built into the telephones. So after you had an interview, the client would leave, and if you were responsible, which I wasn't always, you would immediately dial whatever your numbers were and record your notes. And then they would, I was in the single parent swing, which was at the northeast corner, and the secretarial unit was just sort of right across the way. And then they would get transcribed and put into the records. When I was in graduate school, I dictated on these round circular things. I can't even remember what they were called, that I'm sure aren't even in historical museums anymore. But that was certainly a really super efficient way of doing dictation. And I don't know how long
It was when I was here. They said the secretaries were in a special office, and it was very convenient.
So you just used the telephone, phoned up and dictated your notes into the telephone, and then they were transcribed.
Somebody in that other room would take the disc when it was full and off with it.
Interesting.
Fairly efficient, Bill.
I would love to have that.
Sounds like heaven. What other parts, Marie?
Well, that special office, I think, later became the nursery of sorts.
Correct.
Here at Lutheran Social Services.
And I don't know what it is now.
And that was wonderful because from that, just having the space and having that as primary responsibility for that area, we could have groups, and that I certainly didn't have groups where I was before I worked here, which was at the county for children, in other words, and then the development of child care specialists to work with the children while we were, as social workers, were working with parents here, and so that was a very welcome addition.
What are some other things that you remember about when you came to work here from where you worked before? When you came to work here, what were some things you remember that made your job better or made it easier for you to do your work here as opposed to where you did it before?
Well, one of the things that I still appreciate, and I know this building is tired and overgrown, but even as services have changed at times, there used to be GED classes going on here and so forth, but even now, if I have someone in need of housing, I can take them down to the housing office, and if the door is open, I know that person's available. I realize with the new building that there'll be different floors and whatnot, but I gotta tell you, to be able to take, for instance, a refugee or a client who needs housing or financial counseling, or needs to, if I need to get adoption records for a client I'm working with who was adopted through here, it is so convenient. It is so, and I know the people who are there. I know everybody in their offices. It has made it tremendously, not just convenient, but fluent and functional. And I'm always impressed with how nicely we've interwoven these services, even though certain ones, as I say, have changed. And someone mentioned too the camaraderie. I lost a partner a few years ago, and I used to say I could go into almost every office in this building and put my head on somebody's shoulder. This place just draws sweet people and highly competent people. And I hope we are able to maintain some of that when we move. I hope we're able to find ways to do what we're doing, to have access to each other and communicate with each other.
Shirley?
At the time, when I was working here, we were overwhelmed at times with the number of requests we had for help. And so we did a lot of educational things. And we had I don't remember the name, it was a series of 6 when we had special speakers come, and the parents and the children and the alleged fathers could come, and then we would break up into small groups. And I felt that some of the small groups, we were a little crowded because we'd use people's offices. But I think the agency opened up too many opportunities when we were really busy, but we could work it out because of the setup, and we needed the larger spaces for the educational part. And then we had the smaller groups. And we started doing more group things for a while, in addition to your individual counseling, because we could, and because the administration was helpful to us.
What are some other things that this building made possible in terms of good practices of social work and dealing with other people? You might think of anything else we haven't hit on? Yes, Nancy.
I know there were times when they needed witnesses in the UM unit where they would come to the secretarial pool and ask one of us to come and witness the signing of the parent. And it was really convenient because they were right close by us.
The other fun.
Notaries.
Yeah.
Notaries.
Right.
Always a notary.
Sue.
Another fun thing I fondly remember is the far corner room, the adoption room, where as a child care worker you would bring the baby in for the new parents.
To meet the new parents.
And that was such a happy time.
Now, we want to hear a lot about that. So let's go on to that since you brought it up, Sue. We hear this a lot from people who have adopted. Maybe you'd like to speak a little bit about this too. But anyway, we've heard so many people talk about the, what was it called, transfer room? No, receiving room. The receiving room. And so those of you who worked in adoption or have other memories, could you talk a little bit about that room and what happened there and so forth?
I have not an adoption story, but as a child care worker, I was assigned to a child. The mother had tried to keep the child or work with the child, and it wasn't going to work out, so she decided to give the child up. The father got a hold of that information. There was legal things involved, and determined that if she signed and gave up the child, he would have a right to have the child. She was a white mother, and he was not. The agency had a lot of difficult feelings about the father, and I was involved in bringing the child to him to visit, and she was 2 years old by this time, when finally it was determined that he would have the child. And I remember going to the foster home who had had the child for over 2 years, crying that the baby was leaving. I get in my little Volkswagen, and luckily it's at the top of a hill, her home, because my car wouldn't start. And I open the door, push my foot, get the car to go down the hill, and it starts. Get here, and a lot of the workers were out on conference, so here I am alone in this difficult situation. I walked with the child into what was the receiving room. She looked at her dad, and she froze her hand on my finger. She did not want to go. It was a very difficult situation. And I don't know beyond that how things worked out, but that was a different side of how things work out.
Anybody other memories of people in the receiving room?
I talk about that. That was a celebration room at the end of that adoption unit, at the far end, and the child care workers were on one side, and the adoption workers coming up the other hallway. And the couples would come in. Sometimes you'd see them tentatively getting out of the car in the parking lot with a bundle held close to them, and they had been in here and been interviewed and were going through the process of case studies. I don't know how long that took at that time, but it was a fair amount of time. But coming into that room, and we would have worked to find and work on a placement for that couple, and the joy and the celebration. And there was a little baptismal font that sat back in that adoption room. And sometimes Chaplain Drunke or one of the other chaplains would come and do a baptism, even as part of the placement. But I remember I had one family who had 5 boys and wanted a girl. And they were so excited when they got that girl. It was just incredible. They decided there was no other way they were going to get a girl. But a lot of them were first-time parents, of course. And so that room was just, it was a blessing place. And it was a comfortable room with comfortable furniture, light coming in. Again, it's part of this building. It was such a gift. And, you know, people sat down on couches. They didn't sit in stiff chairs. And held those babies, and the bassinet was right there, and over again. And at one time in, I think it was 69 or 70, we were placing 1,000 children a year for adoption. So compared to, and these were not children from other countries at that point in time. They were children from the state of Minnesota. So that placement room was being used, and somebody would go down the hall and find a chaplain to bless the family. Or Dr. Jurdy himself would come down the hall and meet with the couple. And I do remember moving out of this building and into the new State Center, which is in St. Paul. And it was it was like cutting my leg off. Because when we worked in this building, because I was in administration services at that time, no longer in adoption, but working with communications and publications and management kinds of issues. But in this building, we would walk up and down the hall, off to the lunchroom or coffee, and we would see clients, people, real people being served in this building. And all of us were in awe of many of the people who came in here and needed help. I mean, they just had dire circumstances. But when we moved to the other building, it was just the difference of day and night, because we didn't see any more clients. We worked in that building with the state administrative offices, which is a nice package, but it's not the people we cared for.
Peter, you were a customer of this receiving room. So tell us a little bit about your experience in that room.
Well, actually, for the international adoptions, we didn't. I was familiar with that room, and many of you probably know Evie Iverson, and she was our caseworker, and we were good friends with Clayton Hagan. My wife and I started a parents organization after those first 5 children came, so we had a lot of contact with Lutheran Social Service for the next 20 years in international adoption. But when we were coming here, the casework stuff took a long time. I don't remember how many meetings we had, but you know, they went through a lot of. They had to prove that we were really nice people and all that stuff. But so we were familiar with people coming in and getting babies from that room, and Evie would say, "Oh, look, you know, here's one," and so on. But international adoption, and over the years, Betty and I escorted kids a number of times, but we'd go to Korea, you know, and pick up the kids, bring them here, and then we didn't come down here together. When you came off the plane, you just handed the kid to the new parents right at the airport. That was back in the days when you could stand at the gate, you know. So we probably went out there over 20 years, you know, we were out there 300 times probably, I don't know. Wow. But from all those flights and from here, or from Korea and Vietnam and so on. But so I know the experience, but from a slightly different perspective. What's really heartwarming, I'm an architect, and to hear you talk about, see, these guys, the Sovik Mathri, they were serious about the issues you're talking about. They had no interest. There's something going on in architecture nowadays about entertaining you. They had no interest in entertaining you. They wanted you to feel exactly the way you're talking about it. I am so impressed to hear this, and they would be so pleased to hear you talk about their building with these kind of personal and emotional kinds of ideas about it, as the light and space and being able to communicate easily and interact with other people, and it's really for me it's real overwhelming. And all the things you're talking about are experience that I had here, because we came here many times, not just as adopted parents, but as a part of that program. Then being friends with Bill Seablum, whenever I came in this building, it was always quiet. There was a kind of a serenity about the place, and I'm sure I went to some of those chapel services. I don't remember why, but I mean specifically. But I mean, I think I probably accidentally did. Yeah, the whole place just has the feeling that you're talking about.
I have a question. Why is this building being discarded?
It's not being discarded. It's being repurposed. We need a lot more space, and the building cannot accommodate more space, so that's why. But that's not we'll get to that later. Back to the receiving room. Were there any other comments anybody would like to make about the receiving room? Nancy and Marcia and Marie.
Okay, one of the couples was somebody I knew, and as a secretary, I didn't usually get to go in that room, but when they came, they allowed me to carry the baby in, and it was just so exciting and thrilling to be able to go take this baby and turn it over to them as friends. So it just was a real, highlight.
Marcia.
But sometimes a lot more is involved than just bringing the child in there in one visit. And I can remember one particular time, I think it was probably twin boys, 8 months old, and they were in a foster home at St. Paul Park. And I had to go pick up these boys, and my car died out there. No one could help me except Mr. Merrill. And I don't know if any of you remember Mr. Merrill. He came out there and helped me. And these twins came in for one visit, and when children are older, it usually involved 2 visits. So, and my car didn't have any air conditioning, and it was a very hot day. So lots of times it's more than just coming to visit that room and get your baby. Sometimes it's more than one visit, maybe 2 or 3 days. So it's more than just receiving. There's a lot of work involved, cars breaking down, snowstorms, babies falling on the floor and all that. So there's a lot of grief, a lot of tears, and a lot of happy days.
Marie.
I was just going to say that that room was a special room, and sometimes it was used for groups. There was a way to sign up for it when it wasn't being used strictly for adoption purposes. And occasionally we had groups where we would bring young parents in there, and they always considered that sort of a holy room because the baptismal font was there. And they knew so that was a very special room, and we always got good behavior in there.
Other comments about the receiving room? Let me switch now, and we want to find out if there's anything in your memory of this building that hindered your delivery of social services.
Yes. This was the late 50s when this building was built. Air conditioning admittedly was not the be-all and end-all that it is now. This building was not air conditioned. I was lucky because I was on the east side of the building. The poor people on the west side of the building died. It was, we've talked a lot about the windows, which are great, but the building was frightfully hot. But the first solution was to have some special screens on the windows, which really did help. And I can't remember when the air conditioning actually occurred, but it was not a comfortable building to work in the summer.
Adding on to that, I don't know about all the doors, but the door back in the corner by the child care unit and the secretariat pool, when it was winter and the wind was blowing, you'd get a big draft coming. It was cold.
What were some other things about the building that were less than advantageous?
Well, the heating of it was different in different parts of the building, but I think the one architectural feature that invited people was all the entrances and exits. And I think they had to lock them up because of security issues. But in their attempt to invite, they also created, I guess they didn't anticipate the security issues.
Well, now, we've heard that if Dolores were talking to the architect right now, she'd say, air condition the place. Insulate the doors. And you were saying that it had to be better security. Think of security a little bit.
Better security. It's just that it was in their attempt to. I mean, there are a lot. You count the number of entrances there. There are a lot of entrances to this building.
Original building. We didn't need it.
Well, what are some other things you'd tell the architect if they were still planning the building, based on the knowledge you have now?
What I'm aware of is that we have people, I think when I came here I saw a huge transition from what I thought of at the time was a social service agency, which it still is, but serving incredibly different population. And we need rooms for people to pray. We have Muslim people who are on the floor in the front area anywhere, trying to wash their feet putting their feet up in the sinks, or I'm afraid sometimes maybe the toilets, because they need to do that. And that's something that we've had to accommodate. I mean, when I hear people who've worked here a long time, I think about a woman who called one time and she said, could I come there for counseling even though I'm not Lutheran anymore? And I said, it's fine with me, I never was. And, you know, when you realize, when the housing department moved from across the street into the front, into our building here, and I walked into the entryway one day, and it looked as if it had always been very Caucasian, very middle class, and overnight it turned into a combination of the bus depot and the UN. And I thought, oh my gosh, this place has just transformed. And however, artwork, I think, is a part of that, is acknowledging that we have people that are here from everywhere, and to somehow find a way to address that. And it isn't just through adoption anymore. I had a map of the world put up in the front area, and just for fun I put pins in for all the places that and I've never been out of this country except Canada and Mexico. I put pins in for all of the places that people had come that I had met. And then I put pins in for all the places that people who work here had come from. And it changed when a lot of people started moving the pins, and they were all from Detroit and Chicago. And I realized that people had input too. You know, the customers here had input too about where they were from. So however that's acknowledged that there are different cultural groups, that there are different customs, and that we have not just been a center for changing lives, but we've been a center for changing times, that we have addressed the needs of many, many kinds of people from what was first ever imagined.
There are two more questions in just a couple more minutes, so I have to move us right along. We haven't talked about the addition of this part of the building yet. For those of you who were here when it was just the original part, and then when this part was added, can anybody speak to that, those times, and what that meant, and what it was probably disrupting and so forth, but what happened as a result of that? Sure.
In 1966 is when the counseling unit and chaplaincy unit, and there might have been a couple of other smaller programs, moved to 2445 Park Avenue, which is, we call the Castle on the corner, and we were there for 10 years. And the house next door, LSS owned, and Gail, so it was public relations and accounting, was in that building, I'm not sure how many years.
Fundraising.
The one next to that was the Park Avenue Group Home, which was a home for the they call it emotionally disturbed teenage girls. They had house parents, and then it was Friendship, or the old unmarried mother's home, or the Lutheran home for girls. Then it became Friendship House. Again, it was a treatment program for adolescent girls. So we owned that whole, And so it was a kind of a division. We didn't come over across the street that often because, as you know, you get involved in your own work. We would come occasionally for farewell parties, chapel. And so we missed, there was like 10 years of people that would have come and gone that we didn't know. So that was hard. So it was kind of exciting then to move back again, to be in a brand new building section and come together again as an agency.
And any other people give comments on that move? Thanks, Sharon.
Part of that, so we don't lose that piece, I think when this piece was put on, this room became the chapel and the boardroom and the congregating area. And there is, underneath that screen, a beautiful piece of art that says, "Surely the Lord is in this place." And we often commented on that we truly felt that when we came in here. This particular building addition just added to the flow from that other one. And the other is the beautiful piece of Granlund art sculpture that is a family kind of celebration that's out in the middle that, again, I think speaks to art is so much a part of architecture and the feeling inside of a building, and it surely was true here. And it was nice to get back into this building, you're right.
Last question relates to the grounds. You know, the front yard here from the building to Park Avenue is a substantial amount of property. And then we've got the land out here, out of these windows, and then the courtyards and so forth. Talk a little bit about how the landscaping of the building and the natural surroundings of the building added to or hindered the work that you did here. How did the landscaping help or hinder the work of LSS? Sorry.
It was very peaceful, and I come down here to the Swedish Institute a lot, and it's still peaceful to me. I mean, it's just a calming building, a calming landscape. It's just something, the area, everything. It's just soothing. Of course, it could be history and ties, but I think it's a comfortable scenario.
I'd like to say something about that. This is the only place that I've ever worked in that had the interior courtyard space that allowed for everybody to have an outdoor view. And even though they're enclosed by the building, some of what is really nice about the courtyards, and 2 years that I've worked here really speak to this. We had a mother duck return 2 years in a row and have her ducklings inside the courtyard. Talk about a distraction from your work. New ducklings out in the courtyard.
There were so many human parents.
Yeah, there were so many human parents, as Donna said. It seems that this building was really constructed on the land, and the land that it was constructed on was honored in the work that was done here in the building. There's a special tree that's in memoriam out here on the property that Sharon and others know about. Really, the mature trees that we have around the building and on the other properties that LSS own are such a incredible part of working with people that are really hurting and really struggling. So much of the world that we live in is full of concrete and glass, and to be able to look out and see grass and trees and flowers taken care of well, I think doesn't only provide uplift for the people that come here looking for something, but also for all of us that have come here as workers, provided the kind of support that we needed to do the work well. It's going to be difficult for any structure to really be comparable in that way, I think.
I have some thoughts about this too, because I have a dear friend whose grandmother owned this property, and when she came one time to visit me here, she said my grandmother's estate had courtyards, and it was amazing to her to see that we had somehow, the architects had preserved these courtyards in some fashion. And so I've always kept that, is that, you know, this is a piece of this that has been here forever. It's nice to see staff sitting outside in the summer having meetings and having lunch. I had a client who is HIV positive, and he invited me outside one day for his session. We sat on a park bench and he shared his grapes with me. Being able to step outside, to have someone nurture the gardens. When senior companions were here, we had a flock of plastic flamingos. And anybody who came in might sometimes find those flamingos all pointing at their window, depending. There's good humor, there's beauty. There was a great horned owl out there one time. I mean, I hate to see that leave. I hate to see that go on.
Bill, I just wanted to say, for the benefit of all of you that are here that have such precious memories, is that this building has a reverence that Mark Peterson passed on to me. I've only been here 6 months, but when he brought me here through a tour of this building, he talked so much about how much it has meant to LSS to be here and how special this building is. So that has continued over the years, and just to share with you that he knows the memories and the part that this building has played in your work.
Thank you. I want to honor the time commitment that I made to you, and so we've passed that by a few moments, so I'm sorry about that. But I'd like to take the opportunity first to thank you so much for coming today. This wouldn't have been possible but what for your goodwill to attend. Secondly, I'd like to throw out a big invitation for any memoirs that you have of this building, clients you had, experiences that you've had, whatever in this building. I would really love to get those as memoirs. 200 or 300 words, whatever you want, quite honestly. We will compile them. They'll be used one way or another. Second part of the invitation is for July 20th. The groundbreaking for the new building will take place that day. You'll all get written invitations, of course, but put it on your calendar anyway. July 20th, probably about 11 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And there'll be a lot of people here.
Will this building have been taken down by then, Bill?
No.
They're just going to do a groundbreaking ceremony.
That's right. And so, anyway, thank you so much. You're welcome to stay as long as you like. I thank you so much for coming today. It's been a hugely successful discussion from my perspective, and I hope it is from yours as well.
Bill, could I just add something really quickly?
Yes.
I would also like to echo that, and thanks. We record a lot of historic buildings and other historic places around the state when they're going to be taken down. We usually approach the buildings from a fairly traditional standpoint, and someone goes out and takes pictures of the architecturally significant spaces, or perhaps there's something else about the building. But we haven't really done something just like this before, where we really talk a lot about what people felt about the building and what the spaces meant to them. So this is kind of a pioneering effort for us too. And I think I speak on behalf of Charlene, the historian working on this, and myself to say that this is quite exciting, and it might be something that we repeat in other examples. So thank you very much for giving us a chance to try something out.
Thanks. Question.
Yes,
where will the services go while the new building is being built?
Well, wouldn't you know, we're just so darn lucky. Alina had its headquarters across the street, kitty corner from here, next to the Phillips Eye Institute for a few years. And they took all the executives and the whole organization and moved up to the old Sears building that's now open. It's a pretty cool place. If you haven't been up there, it's really worth a visit. So all the executives are there, so that building is empty. So we're going to move everybody in there for 2 years or a year and a half, and then move right back here. And it's just great because what I learned anyway, perhaps Pat might say something about it, but the offices are all equipped with desks and telephone lines and computer lines and chairs and the whole thing. So it's not a matter of going and converting a school or a hospital or something like that. It's just a perfect place. And so that'll be the temporary period. To answer your question, Paul, just real quickly, every possible study was done some years ago to figure out, well, how could you build an extra layer, and it wasn't strong enough, and then you've got to go, because of, the city of Minneapolis is not an easy a place to live, quite frankly. So you've got to have a certain number of parking spaces and on and on and on into the night. So it was just impossible to save this building and build around it, if you know what I mean. So that was the, even though it was tried for a long time, a feasible way just was never figured out. I sent you brochures about the new building, which is pretty exciting. And it'll be 48 units of affordable housing, all the services that are currently here on 3 floors, and Messiah Lutheran Church, all on this space. There'll be parking in the, in a ground, below the ground place, and there'll be a big garage, and I think it'll be a very fine hour for LSS again when this is all done and rebuilt, and a lot of wonderful memories will continue on, but I'm pretty excited about it, quite frankly. So,
What's going to happen with the church then, Messiah?
well, they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with that. They're not sure yet. I think they've got to kind of get over here and get organized before they determine what to do with the church. But anyway, it's a good neighborhood, so a lot of people have got their eyes on it, I'm sure.
Just so they don't tear that down.
Yeah. Okay, thanks so much for coming today.